thing to keep in mind during this time is that the best way to determine whether or not it's a discard or whether or not it's a silent treatment is that silent treatments last for a specified amount of time. The amount of time varies, but it's usually what the narcissist does during that silent treatment that determines whether or not it's a silent treatment or whether it's a discard. Silent treatments start off the way that a discard does, in that there's no communication. They may allow your text, your DMs, your phone calls to go unanswered. Discards tend to start off the same way. The difference, if I had to do a versus the silent treatment versus the discard, I would have to say that when it's a discard, the narcissist will generally jump right in dead into another relationship. It doesn't mean that they're not entertaining another source of supply during the time that they're enacting this silent treatment. It depends on the reason. Now, it's not going to be a reason. When I say the reason, it's not something that you've said or something that you've done. That's generally based on whether or not there's a perceived slight on the behalf of the narcissist. If the narcissist perceives that you've done something to slight them, or if you've unknowingly inflicted a narcissistic injury, they'll give you a silent treatment as a way of punishment. It could have been something as simple as attempting to hold them accountable for their behaviors. And what I mean by that is they could have been caught cheating and you attempt to hold them accountable for their behaviors. And the way that they avoid being accountable for their behaviors is to punish you for attempting to hold them accountable. So they're doing that to condition you, to sort of train you on how to behave, what to say, what not to say, because they have that unrealistic expectation that they don't necessarily have to communicate with you that you've done something. In normal relationships, communication is necessary. You have to have open, honest communication for a healthy relationship. And because they engage in that magical thinking, they don't believe that they should have to do that. You should be able to read their mind. So the way that they train you how to act is by punishing you with things like a silent treatment. So again, if I had to do a comparison of a silent treatment versus a discard, I would say that the discard involves them almost immediately. And the reason why that happens, it's not because they found some source of grade A luxury. I'm going to refer to it as a luxury narcissistic supply, because that's generally what they get from their primary source of narcissistic supply. Narcissistic supply is basically energy. It's energy or anything. I want to say anything and everything that they believe that they can get, that they want, or that they may need from that particular source. Anything that they want, anything that they need from that woman, because they engage in that magical thinking, I think it, therefore, it is, or it will be. And that's the reason why they manipulate in order to get their needs met. And that's whether it's an emotional need, a psychological need, or whether it's a material need, a physical need, in the sense that it could be sex, it could be money, it could be access to your assets, it could be access to, um, you may have the ability to be able to get them a job if they need a job. Um, and likewise, business associates or affiliations, um, whatever it is that that particular source has that they want or that they need, they'll manipulate in order to get it. Now, the discard usually involves the narcissist being in a relationship immediately. It doesn't matter whether or not you're married. It doesn't matter if you've been in a relationship living together with this person for 40 years. There are a lot of elderly uh, survivors or survivors in their golden years that have either been married to the narcissist for 20, 30 years, or at a time when you would expect that you should be basically retiring. Sometimes they clean victims out of their life savings. They may steal property, they'll steal businesses or fuck them out of their parts in businesses that they've invested in jointly. It doesn't matter whether it's a house. It doesn't matter if there are children involved. Even if they were not actively co-parenting when they were in the household with the children, that's not the reason why um, they'll attempt to get custody of the children. One reason why they'll attempt to get custody of the children is to avoid paying child support. The other part is that anything and everything that they can do to cause the maximum amount of pain and suffering during a discard is what they do. A silent treatment is not something that's going to last indefinitely. However, the discard may last indefinitely. It may not. It depends on that particular narcissist and what options they have at their disposal. So a lot of times, I think um, years ago when I first, it's coming up on 3 years, when I first found the narcissistic abuse community, not YouTube, but when I first came to the narcissistic abuse community almost 3 years ago, um, they were using the term the final discard. Now, at that time, I believed that that is what I had experienced, the final discard, only to realize that there is no final discard. Survivors will inquire because they're so trauma bonded to the narcissist, and because the pain and suffering, they're in excruciating pain and they're suffering. So they want to get the narcissist back. And you sort of, a part of the cognitive dissonance is not holding on to who and what you thought the narcissist was in the beginning of the relationship. Sometimes a part of the cognitive dissonance is having selective memory when it comes to what you actually experienced in the relationship. But because the pain and suffering is so great, they want any line and start looking for ways to trigger a Hoover. They want to know what they can do, because at this point, the narcissist, for the most part, is openly in another relationship. That's being flaunted in their face. They're moving on as if that former spouse, girlfriend, mother of child, fiance never existed. The narcissist may have immediately gotten another woman pregnant. They may find out that he already had another woman pregnant, or he just had another child with another woman. They may find out that he's moved in with another woman. They may find out that he's taken another woman to the very same places where they've been before. And they're posting that on social media. And seemingly, they're the happiest that they've ever been in their entire life. So, as the former source of supply, now they have different categories of narcissistic supply. Sometimes and I'm going to use the new age term, would be side chick. Okay. In my generation, they called them home wreckers, um, the other woman, the outside woman, the woman that was waiting in the wings. That's generally a secondary source of narcissistic supply. So the primary source would be the constant. And for the most part, that's generally the source of supply that they abuse. They abuse everybody. They use, manipulate, and exploit everybody. They use their interpersonal relationships to be able to exploit people. But that's generally the person that they abuse the most. The person that's seen them without the mask. Those that are in intimate relationships with them. For instance, a narcissist isn't going to show his coworkers and his boss a side of him that he would show his spouse or his girlfriend or his fiance or the mother of his children. She's not going to see the same side of him that the neighbor across the street sees. So they have different categories of narcissistic supply, although they are exploitative in all their relationships. It's generally their significant other or the spouse that they are the most abusive to. So a lot of times survivors are trying to intentionally trigger a Hoover. And what I know for a certainty, almost 3 years after the fact, is that it doesn't matter what you do to attempt to trigger a Hoover. They're not going to Hoover until that source the new supply does something that either narcissistically injures them or angers them or disappoints them, or if and when, it's not even a matter of if, it's when she fails to live up to the narcissist's unrealistic expectations. If he does not have an available reserve of narcissistic supply, it may have been based on whether or not he's had the opportunity to groom other sources. Now, if they've had the opportunity to groom other sources, and make no mistake about it, even though it seems that this is the happiest that they've ever been, yes, in that moment they probably are, because they're overdosing on narcissistic supply. They're not getting the level of narcissistic supply from the secondary source or from the new supply that they were getting from you, because you have to keep in mind that they were depleting you of your energy. The abuse was robbing you of your energy. You're not going to give a person that's love bombing you, that's basically held up a figurative mirror and showed you. And that's actually the person that you fall in love with. But you're not going to give the person that's doing that, the person that's presenting or that's manifesting as your soulmate, the same amount of narcissistic supply that you give a person that you just caught cheating, or any of the other things that narcissists do that are abusive, whether it's emotionally abusive, whether it's verbally abusive, or whether it's physically abusive, whether it's financially um, abusive, and that is exploitative, or it's very parasitic, or if they're not paying their fair share of the bills and they're leaving that burden on you, but at the same time, they're triangulating you with their other sources of supply. You're not going to give a person that's doing that the same amount of narcissistic supply you would a person that was love bombing you, person that seemingly loved you unconditionally. That's not who they are. The person that they showed you as they ghosted you with the intent to discard you, that's who they are. And that's not black and white thinking, or not being able to see a gray area. Ultimately, that is what they will show you, that that is who they are. And the more comfortable they are with that new supply, they're going to show you more and more of who and what they are. The only time that you're even going to get remotely close to love bombing is when they're attempting to hoover you back in. And that's when the new supply has done something to displease them, something to disappoint them, failed to live up to their expectations, or narcissistically injured them. Now, if you're talking about your homosexual type of narcissist, it could be that the new supply kicked him out and he doesn't have any place to go. Now, if he doesn't have any other secondary sources waiting in the wings, if he doesn't have a reserve, and then it will also depend on the rapport and the nature of the relationship that he has with those sources as well, the secondary source. If, first of all, they always have women waiting in the wings. Let's be clear about that. But they may not be able to just move in with that woman and have her meet all of his physical needs, provide his food, clothing, and shelter. That's not something that they're going to be able to get even all of their secondary sources to do. There are some that may, but that may not be the case. If that's not the case, and you're talking about a somatic narcissist or somebody that uses their sex and uses good sex and uses their sexual prowess and their sexuality to be able to have women provide for their sustenance and their covering, well, that requires that they have women that are going to take them in and provide for their material needs. Now, sometimes they do that, and based on being deceived by that source of supply, they may believe that that woman can meet their material needs, only to find out that she doesn't have the money that she said that she has. She doesn't have the resources or the assets that she led him to believe that he has. Sometimes that's the reason why you have failed sources of supply. But if it's a narcissist that's in survival mode, he will most definitely mooch and leech off of. They're very parasitic anyway, especially if you're talking about, um, I think the school of categories are the greater, which is more like the narcopath, the psychopath, um, the mid-ranger, and then there's the lesser narcissist. If you're talking about your lesser narcissist or somewhere between the mid-ranger and the lesser type of narcissist, those are the narcissists that live very, very parasitic lifestyles. If you're talking about a narcissist that isn't in that financial status, if that is not that particular narcissist's financial status quo, then they will often use their money to be able to secure other sources of supply. Those are the ones that fine wine and dine, and they have the resources to be able to do it. Often that's what they use in civil proceedings. That's what they use to give them the one up in divorce proceedings and custody cases, and to dupe them out of property and assets that they may own jointly, as well as businesses that they may own jointly, where that particular business partner or that spouse is the one that invested in the business. And if they can fuck them out of it, that's exactly what they're going to do. Okay. And they'll use their money to be able to do that. They'll take and they'll move their assets. They do all of that to compound the pain and suffering. So a lot of times survivors will believe that triggering a Hoover is in their best interest, but the outcome is going to be the same. Because the same way that they left, and that's just not something that a person that genuinely loved and cared about you in a relationship is going to do. Even in the instance of when, and it's not that breakups are not painful, these are not normal breakups. One of the things that's very frustrating during this time is that people that you expected would understand could possibly be recruited by the narcissist as flying monkeys, and that includes some of your closest family. That includes some of your closest family member and friends. The narcissist may actually recruit them as flying monkeys or successfully turn them against you. So That's something else that survivors also experience. People that they believe should know them a lot better than that may be privy to all of the narcissistic abuse. Nonetheless, they will side with the narcissist. And it may not be evident immediately, but once you identify based on this pattern of repetitive behavior that they've engaged in, it doesn't matter whether it's weeks, it doesn't matter whether it's months, it doesn't matter whether it's years. In the case of when it's only lasted for a couple of weeks or it's only lasted for a couple of months, and that doesn't mean that the damage is lesser or greater, depending on how long you've been with the narcissist. Even a short-term exposure to a narcissist are psychological predators. So even a short amount of time, a short-term exposure in an interpersonal relationship with a narcissist can cause a significant amount of damage. Because the psychological abuse, the emotional abuse, even in the absence of physical abuse, occurs in all of their interpersonal relationships. But again, they're not going to abuse the neighbor or their boss or their coworker or their supervisor in the way that they do their spouse or their significant other. So they're not going to see that side of the narcissist. They're not going to show your neighbor across the hall the side of them that you see when you witness the mask slip, or you get a glimpse of what's behind what's behind the mask, or in ignorance you unknowingly rip that mask off and cause a narcissistic injury. And calling them out on their behavior will definitely cause them to fly into a narcissistic rage. Because from the narcissist perspective, who the fuck are you to attempt to hold me accountable for anything? Didn't I say that I was sorry? Didn't I tell you that I didn't mean that? Even if there's not an ounce of sincerity coming from them while they're saying it. Who the fuck are you to hold me accountable is the way that they think. And that's sometimes the reason why they'll punish you with a silent treatment. You could put your foot down and say, listen, this is unhealthy. This is abusive. It's unfair. I don't treat you this way. I don't do you this way. And I'm not going to tolerate you doing me this way. And you put your foot down and enforce a boundary. Or for instance, you could say, this is financially irresponsible behavior. I'm not going to pick up the slack simply because you're being financially irresponsible. I told you the last time that I bailed you out, I'm not going to do it. You need to pay your own bills. You need to pay your own, whether it's your car note or whether it's insurance, doesn't matter. It could be gas in the car. You could tell them, listen, I told you the last time that I gave you money for gas, I'm not going to keep doing this. You need to be financially self-sufficient and fill your own damn gas tank up with gas. And no, I'm not going to loan you my car. Well, that's a boundary. And what they will try to do is trample on your boundaries if you allow them to. They're going to give you some pushback to see whether or not you're really going to enforce that boundary by doing it coercively, by trying to use coercive control tactics. And when that doesn't work, they will absolutely vamp up the abuse. Absolutely. They will become abusive because you put a boundary in place, because that's not what they're accustomed to. So a lot of times, something as healthy for you as setting a boundary, narcissists absolutely loathe boundaries. They will do anything to get around that boundary, bulldoze that boundary, even if they have to dig a goddamn trench and get down in the trenches and crawl under the boundary. That is exactly what they're going to do. In the event that they cannot do that, and you don't make it optional that they respect a particular boundary, from the very moment that you do that, that relationship, the days of that relationship are numbered. And I don't want survivors to be confused about the days of the relationship being numbered, because sometimes the trauma bond can be so great, and the cognitive dissonance can cause survivors to believe, well, in order to get this pain and this suffering to stop, I will acquiesce to the narcissist, and I will tolerate the abuse for the sake of having the narcissist. Again, whether or not the relationship that you experienced when you were being idealized or when you were being love bombed is no more. That phase is gone. And the only time that you're going to even witness, even remotely close to love bombing, at least the way that you did in the beginning of the relationship when you were being idolized, is when they're attempting to hoover. And what happens is, once they realize that they are able to successfully hoover you, that behavior stops the minute that you've taken the bait for it. The time that the love bombing lasts, they'll do it up until the time that you let them back in the house, that you do whatever it is that they're wanting you to do. Once they're able to successfully manipulate you into giving them more narcissistic supply after they have discarded or ghosted you, or been very public and open about them being in another relationship, getting married or having a child with somebody else, make no mistake about it, that period where they're love bombing you in order to hoover you back in is going to be very short lived as soon as they get what they want. It doesn't matter whether it's sex, whether it's money, whether it's a place to live, whether it's to get you to give them a letter of recommendation. It doesn't matter. Whatever it is that they need or that they want from you at that particular time, once they get that, even if it's for you to nurse them back to health, where they're not suffering from that narcissistic injury anymore. That narcissistic injury is all better. They'll be right back out there doing the same exact thing. So the new supply isn't going to get anything that you haven't gotten. In some instances, how they treat the new supply may actually be worse. You don't know what their boundaries are. You don't know how healthy they are mentally or emotionally. And a lot of times we just assume that a narcissist is in a relationship with another codependent, or they're in a relationship with somebody that's a HSP or an empath. That may not always be the case, because narcissists are also attracted to borderlines, and they may, if they are narcissistically injured enough, they may unknowingly get into a relationship with another narcissist. They may be in a relationship with a psychopath, a female psychopath, or a female sociopath. That's a lot of times the reason why they experience failed sources of supply. Those are the instances of where they believe that somebody is rich, or that somebody's financially self-sufficient, only to find out that that's not the case. To believe that they're getting into a relationship with somebody that's going to be a fidel, only to find out that she actually cheats more than he does. The narcissist, if you're talking about the lower level homosexual type of narcissist, he is a male gold digger. Well, unbeknownst to him, he's in a relationship with a female narcissist, or a female psychopath, or what they call, referred to as a narcopath, and she may clean him out of his ad, clean him out financially. She may be exploitative and predatory on him financially. She may rob him. She may have him robbed. So yeah, because they do experience failed sources of supply, where they think the grass is greener on the other side. And if that primary source, without knowing, a lot of times, until you actually know what they are, or what they're suspected to be, right? Because we're not psychologists, so we're basing, and this is the reason why a lot of those that are well respected in the narcissistic abuse community always tell women, don't worry about the titles. We don't have the ability to diagnose anybody with a mental illness, and that includes a personality disorder. But you can absolutely discuss what your personal experiences have been, as well as use it as a point of reference. Hey, this is what he did. You can you can use it as a gauge to make a comparison. And if you see a pattern, the reason why they tell you don't worry about the titles is because fuck the title. If you see problematic behavior repeating itself again and again and again, fuck the title. It doesn't matter whether it was a goddamn narcissist or sociopath or a psychopath or a goddamn giraffe in the Philadelphia Zoo. If you see a motherfucker engaging in problematic behaviors, you don't have to have a goddamn diagnosis to know that those behaviors are toxic and detrimental to you. You don't need that confirmation. If you were to go to a damn zoo, nobody would have to tell you that that was a rhinoceros. You know what? You know what a rhinoceros looks like. Yeah, that's the fact of the matter. You don't have to, you know, it's like if you see a lion, you're not going to confuse a goddamn lion with a house cat. It doesn't matter where you are. If you're walking down the street, you have stray cats, or a cat that may have been locked out of their house unintentionally. The owner may not be aware that they locked the cat out of the house. If you see a goddamn lion, and that's whether it's a female lion or whether it's a male lion walking down the damn street, you're not going to confuse that with a house cat. We have to set a line of demarcation, a clear line of demarcation between what is abuse, what is unhealthy, and what a healthy relationship looks like. The problem is, culturally, we blur those lines. Even in the music, even in the things that in the reality television shows, it's not a clear and concise line being drawn that this is cheating, this is abusive, this is emotionally and verbally abusive, this is sexually exploitative, this is financially exploitative, this behavior here is predatory. Culturally, those lines are blurred. So as you're listening to the music, you can, as you're trying to basically get over the breakup and you listening to a fucking song on the radio, you're watching a show on television, you're watching a movie or some other sitcom, and the message that you're receiving subliminally is telling you that what you're experiencing in the relationship is normal when it's not normal. The shit is toxic and dysfunctional. Especially when culturally you receive the message that if you don't tolerate this behavior, if you don't find this fucking unacceptable behavior acceptable, well, then you're going to continue to be without a significant other. So, what message does that send women? That I have to tolerate this. If I don't want to be alone, if I don't want to be single, as if it's a scarlet letter, if I don't want to be accused of not being able to get and keep a man and willing to sell my goddamn soul, my self-respect, and sacrifice my life savings in order to do it, well, it's a possibility that I could be alone. Well, think about that subliminal message. And the message that if you absorb that as opposed to observing it without absorbing it, think about the subliminal message that that's going to send your psyche. If I don't do this, this, and this, I may have to be alone. So, in other words, if I don't tolerate verbal, emotional, financial, somebody abusing me in the name of spirituality, or physical abuse, that means that I could end up alone or single, wearing the scarlet letter of being single. Think about that subliminal message. The next time, culturally, whether it's in a television show, whether it's in a movie, whether it's in commentary on social media, or whether it's in a goddamn song on the radio, or whether it's in a video, whether it's some celebrity posting something on social media. That abuse is okay. Blurring those, all of that blurs those lines. You want there to be a clear and concise line of demarcation between what is healthy and what is unhealthy, what is abusive and what is normal. Right now, those lines are all blurred. We're normalizing what isn't normal. Settling for anything just to be able to say, I have something. It's almost like women are becoming catty And it's not that women aren't catty anyway, but it's almost like the women that have a men, the women that have men that have husbands are almost teasing the other. It's almost like it's almost as like this. She's saying, look, I have a ding-a-ling and you don't have one. I have a ding-a-ling and you don't have one. It's like little things that we do to each other as little girls to be antagonistic. I got a ding-a-ling, you don't have one. I got a ding-a-ling, you don't have one. Like, there's nothing wrong with ding-a-ling. I think all women, would like nothing more to have a ding-a-ling. But you want a ding-a-ling that's attached to a man that's mentally and emotionally healthy, that's financially stable. Okay, so with that being said, thank you guys for listening. If you found the video helpful, I would appreciate it if you would share it. Like the video if you found the video helpful. And sharing is caring. Pay it forward. And until the next blog post, video, podcast episode, take care, guys.